God made the world and all its wonders for man to explore. And there are countless wonders just outside your front door. Now join natural world photographer and journalist Roger W. Downs as he shares the stories of the people, places, music, and cuisines he has discovered as we explore with RWD.
Hey, I'm Roger W. Downs, your host. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Explore with RWD. And I apologize that this episode is a few days late. Typically, we release a new episode every Wednesday. However, I came down with a slight respiratory infection. Thank God it wasn't COVID, but it made my voice really scratchy and kind of hard to speak for a few days, so we waited to be able to chat with Diane Tomecek, who is the president and CEO of the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust. And I am so glad to have her here on the show because she is going to talk about the amazing world of the sea otters and how you can help to preserve them and their habitat, which they are a very important part of. You're going to find out about that coming up. So let's get right into it. Diane, what is the difference between sea otters and, let's say, river otters? I know both of them live in North America, but they certainly have a lot of differences. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Oh, absolutely, Roger. The two otter species, like you mentioned, that are in the United States here are the North American river otter and that beloved sea otter. And really, truly, first and foremost, the difference between them involves their habitat. And the North American river otter is going to be freshwater dwelling, and the sea otters reside in the northern hemisphere of the Pacific Ocean. And so for us here in the US, sea otters are actually present just in California, Washington, and Alaska. And then you can really start to look at the physical characteristics that kind of make up the two species. Sea otters are going to be larger. They range from 4 to 5 feet and can weigh upwards of 65 pounds, whereas the North American river otter is between 3 and 4 feet and probably no more than about 35 pounds. There are larger ones, but ultimately those are just good averages for them. Sea otters themselves, they have that front paw-like foot up front and more of a rear rudder-like flipper. The river otter actually is going to have all 4 webbed feet with really visible claws. And that river otter, because of those webbed feet, is really agile and comfortable moving to and from water to land. Whereas the sea otter, and this actually is so endearing to me, if you've ever tried to watch a sea otter come from the water and haul out to land, they are so awkward and clumsy, it's cute. So really, truly, they are very awkward and clumsy on land. They really need to stay in that ocean water.
And if by chance you've never seen a sea otter waddle its way up onto the beach, which is kind of humorous to watch, and I'm sure you probably haven't seen, I found a video on YouTube for you. You can find the link to that video to watch in the description of this podcast. But sea otters typically are in the ocean swimming on their backs, unlike their cousins in the river. Can you explain, Diane?
That river otter primarily swims on their stomach, and their tail is elongated and rounded because of that. So I guess easiest way to think about their differences is think habitat first, and then go into their differences in their physical characteristics.
And by the way, if you should ever find yourself swimming in the Pacific Northwest, which is kind of cold most of the time, so I wouldn't suggest it, you're going to want to make sure to avoid getting too close to sea otters while you're out there taking the plunge. Don't allow their cuteness to deceive you, right?
We certainly never advise people to think that because they are so cute and cuddly that they aren't going to hurt them. They are still wild animals, and they are very, very powerful, and their jaws are very powerful. And those little stout arms that almost look like a T-Rex on their front paws, they are very, very strong.
So keep that in mind. They're like little Mike Tysons out there bopping around in the water waiting to pop you. Okay, maybe not, but be safe and always try to avoid wild animals. It is best practices never to feed them, interact with them, or get too close because they are wild animals. But Diane, what is the habitat typically for a sea otter?
They're actually just a coastal marine mammal, so they're going to be residing in coastal marine habitat, which is characterized by rocky shores and a sandy ocean floor. And they are also present in coastal wetlands. And again, just keeping in mind that northern hemisphere for the Pacific Ocean, there is a freshwater river otter based in South America that is often confused with the northern based sea otter that's actually known as the marine otter. And that's why I distinguish between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere for our sea otters that we're actually working with.
So is there a difference between the sea otters in the northern hemisphere versus the sea otters in the southern hemisphere, similar to the American river otter and then the American sea otter?
The otter that is the marine otter is actually a river otter. So go back to those differences between sea otters and river otters. The only real true sea otter and scientific name Enhydrolutris that is in the world is Enhydrolutris. It's just that many folks have been known to confuse the two because marine otters in South America do inhabit the sea as well as the river.
So if you're a little confused, let me see if I can clarify this for you. Marine otters, which live primarily in the southern hemisphere, frequent both the ocean and freshwater tributaries, such as rivers and creeks that pour into the ocean. Meanwhile, in the northern hemisphere, like here in the States, Canada, you'll only find sea otters in saltwater bodies. They stay away from those freshwater tributaries. That's where their cousins, the American river otters, dwell. And by the way, American river otters don't like salt water. So hopefully I cleared that up for you just a little bit in case you were lost. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Diane Tomecek, the president and CEO of the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust. And she's going to pull back the curtain and explain why the sea otter's dining habits are so important to the ecosystem of the Pacific and the Pacific Northwest.
Don't wander off now. Explore with RWD will be right back after this.
Hey, it's me again, Roger W. Downs, and along with this podcast, I'm also a landscape, nature, and wildlife photographer. And my ultimate goal is to help you connect with God and His artistry. That's why I love to share my photography with you. So I'd invite you to come see some of my imagery at my website, rogerwdownsphotography.com, or you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Roger W. Downs Photography. Don't worry, all the links so you can find me are in the description of this podcast.
Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
Sea otters. You can't help but love them, right? They're so cute, they're adorable, you just want to pinch your little cheeks. A really bad idea. Because they will get super aggressive with you if you do. And we discussed that earlier with Diane Tomecek, the president and CEO of the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust. But speaking about their chompers, what exactly do sea otters dine on, Diane?
Well, just a little background to their need to eat. Sea otters actually lack blubber that a lot of other marine mammals have to actually survive in the cold Pacific waters that they live in. And so in order to actually survive in those cold waters, sea otters really need to maintain a high metabolic rate. And so they need to eat approximately 25 to 30% of their body weight every day. And in doing so, they're actually feasting on animals like bivalves, such as clams and mussels, shrimp, crabs, sea stars, and most importantly for sea otters, they are eating sea urchins. Their love of sea urchins is why sea otters are actually considered a keystone species for that nearshore environment. Sea urchins themselves love to eat kelp. And so sea otters love to eat sea urchins. So they have this circular relationship that by keeping the sea urchins in check, sea otters are able to allow the kelp forest to flourish and grow and become really good, viable habitat for a myriad of other marine life and other species. So that's why we consider them a keystone species for their nearshore ocean habitat.
So is it safe to say that if sea otters weren't little piggies dining on sea urchins all the time, then that could seriously damage the ecosystem of the Pacific Ocean?
It can in those areas, yes. And we scientists actually refer to that scenario as an urchin barren. And I don't know if some of your listeners might want to look that up. You can just type in, sea urchin barren, and at the base of the ocean, you'll just have all of the urchins are down at the ocean floor, and there's really nothing else. And it's just, whereas where a sea otter actually allows the kelp to flourish, it's a beautiful rainforest canopy under the ocean. It's wonderful.
But if you want to research more about urchin barrens, I found an article on the Sea Grant, California website entitled Combating Urchin Barrens with Aquaculture. I put the link to it in the description of this podcast for you to check out later. But Diane, let's talk a little bit about the kelp itself. Does it also benefit the sea otters, since technically they are protecting it with their ferocious appetites?
Certainly, yes. They will often tie themselves off in kelp so that they don't end up floating, during ocean current times, floating kind of far off out into the ocean. And they, especially when they're raising pups, they'll tie their pups off into that kelp so that the pups don't end up floating away either. Sea otter pups are actually completely buoyant for the first time frame of their life, and their fur just keeps them floating on the top of the water. So the mother sea otter will actually tie her pup off in the kelp to ensure that she really doesn't lose it and has an ability to get right back to where it is. Also, that kelp forest, again, being flourishing, many other animals that sea otters will actually consume and eat will actually come into that area. So they're helping replenish, to some degree, their own food sources.
Too bad that doesn't apply to humans. Can you imagine if we went to our favorite restaurant and every time we ate there, they'd have better food next time? Well, maybe it does apply. So Diane, let's talk a little bit about the sea otters and the fact that they almost went extinct. What happened there?
Well, it took them to the verge of extinction was the fur trade of the 1700s and 1800s. I think I briefly mentioned that they have the densest fur of any animal on the planet. You may be aware, or maybe some of the listeners would be aware, that they actually have approximately 1 million hairs per square inch on their body. So if you've got a 4-foot sea otter, you could do the math on how many square inches that is on that animal. And so if you have 1 million hairs per inch there, their fur was really coveted during that fur trade, and they were hunted to near extinction during that time. And the 1911 Fur Seal Treaty actually came in and made the fur trade cease to exist, and we started to actually protect the animals again. And then sea otters they are further protected by the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972, which further protects them in terms of harassment and hunting and killing of them. But back to California, there was a small population. They thought California sea otters were actually extinct because of that fur trade. And just off the coast of Big Sur around Bigsby Creek, in approximately 1938, there was a small number of southern sea otters that were found, probably about 30 to 40 animals. And all of the southern sea otter stock, which is hovering at about 3,000 animals in California today, have come back from that small population of 30 to 40 animals.
If that isn't a comeback story, I don't know what is. Again, we're chatting with the president and CEO of the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust, Diane Tomecek. And when we come back, sea otters are still facing some pretty nasty perils, which could take them back to the verge of extinction. But you can get involved in helping. She'll explain next.
Don't go too far. Explore with RWD. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's me again, Roger W. Downs, and along with this podcast, I'm also a landscape, nature, and wildlife photographer. And my ultimate goal is to help you connect with God and His artistry. That's why I love to share my photography with you. So I'd invite you to come see some of my imagery at my website, rogerwdownsphotography.com, or you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook at Roger W. Downs Photography. Don't worry, all the links so you can find me are in the description of this podcast.
That wasn't too bad now, was it? Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
So let's continue our conversation with the president and CEO of the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust, Diane Tomecek. Now, you might be saying to yourself, since the sea otters have made such a robust return from the verge of extinction, why is there a Sea Otter Foundation and Trust? What are the challenges that sea otters are facing today? Diane?
Well, sea otters in general are still facing challenges with ocean pollution, to some poor interactions with fishermen in certain areas, and then decreased food sources, really some other diseases that are actually affecting them that end up causing their death. Specifically, our organization formed in 2013 when I was at a conference and learned of the need within the sea otter industry, which is a small industry, for a dedicated sea otter fund, where they were not needing to compete with other funding for other marine mammals, for example, and where they could just get supportive grants for sea otter research, conservation, and education. And then we actually formed again in 2013. I am actually the founder, and I have about 25 years worth of nonprofit experience in development and marketing of nonprofit.
So that is a huge undertaking, Diane, to start a whole foundation and trust to help fund sea otter research and conservation. What was it? What was that moment for you that you were like, I have to do this?
I would say for me personally, it was my love of the animal, and again, my nonprofit experience, because I adore sea otters, and I actually started working with otters themselves, working with river otters and promoting their continued existence and their conservation. And that's why I was at that conference. And so sea otters were actually always my favorite of the two. And so I think I ended up taking the leap from there.
So when monies are donated or raised by the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust, better known as SOFT, soft like how sea otters are soft and cuddly and you just want to hug them. You shouldn't. They're wild animals. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. You can fantasize about it, but don't do it. How is that money spent, Diane?
Well, that actually, donors give donations to us, and then we are actually issuing grants to sea otter researchers and biologists and conservation initiatives and education programs as they relate to sea otters. And we do that once a year. I'm actually really proud that from our inception in 2014 is when we received our charitable nonprofit 501c3, and we've issued approximately 30 grants from that time. And we've never had to take a year where we couldn't issue, for example, because of COVID or anything like that. And so I'm really proud of the donors that have come in to support us, and proud of our volunteers that have helped us, and proud of just our organization to have been able to actually do that from nothing, from nothing, because there was nothing that existed in this arena to that date. And so when people donate to us, we then take that donation grant fund and issue grants. I have 3 that are featured for us, that out of those 30, one of which is the Elkhorn Slough Foundation Otter Cams that we have actually supported with in our past. They have two remotely operated cameras that exist out in Elkhorn Slough, which is a wetland marsh outside of Moss Landing, California, Central California, just down from Santa Cruz. And those cameras, again, being remotely operated, we gave funding to assist with long life batteries and advancing their bandwidth and technology so that you can tune in at any given time to witness the sea life of Elkhorn Slough. And the following year, we actually helped them to further upgrade the cameras with audio. So now when you tune in to looking at the Elkhorn Slough Foundation Otter Cam, you can actually just essentially experience being there in Elkhorn Slough, sitting, watching sea otters right there. And so that was amazing. That was some of our first initial grants that we gave from an educational standpoint.
I know what you're thinking right now. I want to watch sea otters live. Where do I go to do that? I don't blame you. They're adorable. They're cute. You just want to hold them. I know. Don't do that. I keep bringing it up. I got to get past this. You can visit them online at elkhornsloughfoundation.org. That's elkhornsloughfoundation.org. Or you can find the link in the description of this podcast. But the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust doesn't just support live webcams. They help with many other conservation projects based around sea otters. Diane, can you explain a little bit more?
A couple other grant recipients that donors are able to essentially donate to us, and then we donate to the researchers and facilities that are working directly with them. One of our past award recipients is the Alaska Sea Life Center, who are actually working to rehab the marine mammals of Alaska, but more specifically as it relates to our organization, the Sea Otters. And we've helped them to upgrade their sea otter nursery, help them replace their flooring with easier to clean flooring, easier to hose off flooring, and then also help them to build out some sea otter pup cribs. If you can imagine that being so endearing and cute to see a little sea otter pup sleeping in a pup crib. It's just amazing. I love that.
Listen, Diane, you can't be coming up in this podcast talking about cute baby otters and not have photos. We need photos. And you're in luck because the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust has photos of baby sea otters, and so does the Elkhorn Slough Foundation website, which is all, again, in the description of this podcast. Please feel free to visit either organization. But Diane, if someone wanted to get involved and help out with sea otters and donate to SOFT, how can they go about doing that?
Well, you can actually donate via our website, which is www.seaotterfoundationtrust.org. And on our website also, if they prefer to just send in a donation, they can mail a donation to our PO box, which is listed on our website as well.
Not that I'm saying you're holding back here in any fashion, but what other details about SOFT would you like to share with us?
We are a completely 100% volunteer-based organization. So all funds and monies raised go directly to the people that are actually working with sea otters. And along that line, we actually have some needs right now for volunteers. We're currently searching for individuals that have digital advertising experience. So working with Google digital advertising and search engine optimization, better known as SEO, as well as some people that would like to come in and work with captioning and writing some factoid style information for social media. So kind of looking for a social media marketer as well.
Thank you, Diane, for all of your time today. Again, Diane Tomecek, the president and CEO of the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust. And we've found that there's two ways you can get involved, either monetarily or voluntarily. All the details are at the Sea Otter Foundation and Trust website. Again, that is in the description of this podcast, easy to find. So that wraps things up. Thank you so much for listening to Explore with RWD. Again, I'm Roger W. Downs, your host. I really do truly appreciate you. If you can, check out my website, rogerwdownsphotography.com. Love to have you check out my imagery. And I want to thank Stevenson Travel Adventures for helping to support this podcast. Please visit with them and have them book the trip of a lifetime for you. That's who we use, StevensonTravelAdventures.com. And finally, if no one else has told you this yet today, I love you, and I know the good Lord above loves you. He has promised you that. And no matter what your sins are, you are forgiven. All you need to do is ask. And your sins will be wiped away from you like the east is from the west. So until next time, peace, love, and sea otters, y'all.
Thank you for listening. Visit us online at explorewithrwd.com to discover more about Roger, his photography, podcast, and adventures. Or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Explore with RWD. Remember, we didn't inherit the earth from our parents. We borrow it from our children. May God bless you and yours. Now get outside and go explore. Explore with RWD is produced by Downs Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.